who are in the process of preparing or consider preparing and would know what to expect. The background I'm speaking from, I have a banking history, a banking career, and then went independent, self-employed, and I have been doing audits of ISO 19600, which is compliance management systems, and also 37001 anti-corruption management systems in Russia and Russian-speaking countries in the last 3 years. Now, this introduction is almost something which you'll probably have heard some of these during the 2 days you have been here. Bribery is one of the world's most challenging issues. Over $1 trillion are paid in bribe every year. That was found out by the OECD. The consequences are a dramatic reduction of quality of life, increasing poverty, and eroding public trust. And despite efforts on national and international levels, bribery remains a significant issue. Of course, a little bit culturally dependent, but it is present everywhere. And because of that, a comprehensive standard for a management system against bribery and corruption was issued in 2016. That is the ISO 30001. It is there to promote ethical business culture, and it is a system approach, not a forensic approach. I will say some words about that later. Now, in what way does it benefit your organization if you're not decided yet? Why to do it? Here is why. Of course, there is the internal hygiene. It helps you to fight bribery. It promotes an ethical business culture. It improves the performance of the affected processes. It proves the employee's commitment to anti-bribery best practices. Helps you to monitor and manage risk throughout your business. And demonstrates, that is also going to the outside, it demonstrates that your organization implements, maintains, and improves its anti-bribery compliance program and protects the company, its assets, shareholders, and directors from bribery. Those are the internal reasons, but there are also external reasons why to do it. It helps you gain the confidence of the regulator. That in some businesses is very important. Banking business, for example, that is a very heavily regulated industry, but there are others wherever you need licenses, wherever there is state regulation, this definitely helps to get the confidence of the regulators. It helps to recognize and manage risk, to optimize efficiency and costs. It contributes to defense for regulatory scrutiny. That means the regulator, once he trusts you, may not look as deep and analyze your business as deeply in a cumbersome procedures as he would have if you were not certified. Then it also, that is not evident, may not be plausible for everyone, but it does provide opportunities for business growth. For example, if you're looking at bigger business partners, customers, suppliers who are certified and who have a high demand of an anti-bribery management system, you will get into business with them easier. And also your business partners can benefit. They will get certified easier if you are an important business partner and you are certified. Yeah? And it can also help in obtaining public sector contracts. Now, how does the very certification process go? In the first year, suppose that you already have read the standard, that you have made your own preparation, because without that you will hardly pass it in the first run. You may, but do not have to, do a pre-audit or gap analysis. that is optional. That gives a first opinion on whether to go further or not. Yeah? On the basis of that, if you get a green light, then an audit plan would be drawn up, and you would enter into stage 1. Now, what is stage 1? Stage 1 is usually one or two day thing, event, where all there is to find out if there are any stumbling blocks that keep you from going further, analyzing more deeply than in the gap analysis. Some certifiers may also merge the gap analysis with stage 1. There are 3 types of findings. One that are major nonconformities. If a major nonconformity is found, and it should ideally be found in audit stage 1, means you don't go further to audit stage 2, means you save a lot of money and get some more time to prepare. The second category, the middle, is the minor nonconformity. That is a conformity that you're able to correct within a period of usually 8 weeks after audit stage 2. And once it is corrected, which will be verified, you can get certified. And the third category is the observation, which can remain in place. It does not threaten to disrupt your anti-compliance management system, but it has to be corrected within 1 year and will be checked in the first surveillance audit. Yes, audit stage 2 is the main thing, the longer thing. So once you went through audit stage 1, no major nonconformities were found, then you go into audit stage 2. That is depending on the size of the organization, on the scope of the audit, etc. Days or weeks, but usually days. Definitely longer than audit stage 1, where all the organization is interviewed. I mean, the main risk-carrying units, HR, procurement, marketing, top management, definitely also shareholders, but on all levels of the organization. So the auditor will speak to all hierarchy levels to get a good mix, speaking from top management to simple employees, middle management, focus on those areas that are sensitive to corruption, like I said, procurement, marketing, but also speak to some other ones like IT. And once you went through audit stage 1, usually there are some minor nonconformities. If there are none, you're happy, you can get the certification immediately. If not, then you have the usual 8 weeks to correct. Then the auditor would come again, do a checkup, and once he confirms, then the certification can go on. Now, these audits are, of course, a 3-party agreement. There is a client, there is an auditor or auditor team, maybe 2 of them, and there is the certifier, the company who gives out the certification. And the result of audit stage 2 finished would be that the auditor delivers the audit report to the certification body, who then takes the final decision. Of course, you understand, once you are trying to get certified, you invest money into getting certified, you're sort of vulnerable, because if you end up not getting certified, then this is a little embarrassing. You don't need to worry about that. It is a strict rule that all the auditors, before the certification is issued, have no right to name their clients. So if I go auditing somewhere, all my wife knows is the city I'm going to, yeah? Not the name of the client. That remains confidential until the certification is given. That should give you some comfort. Now, the certificate is valid for 3 years. After year 1 year later, you get, on the basis of an audit plan, make a surveillance audit. In the first year, this comprises or focuses on the observations that were made. They should be eliminated by then. And otherwise, it goes through the organization again, asking if there is if there's new development, if anything got worse, or if there are new risk fields that haven't been taken into account. That is the first year surveillance audit. And in the second surveillance audit, there are no observations anymore, but there's still the same questions. How is the business developing? How is the risk developing? Is the compliance management system still up to that? The main technique of auditing is interviews. The audit does not go as deep as you know that from internal audit or financial audits. So once the auditor has done an interview with a competent person that is considered eligible evidence, plus the auditor will look through some documents without necessarily reading all of it, note down the title of the documents, but also you don't have to give them out. They will usually remain in the company. Their titles will be listed as evidence, but you also don't need to worry about information going out because it physically remains in the company. Now, some initial considerations to have in mind when considering the certification. The best preparation to have if you happen to be certified ISO 19600, that is the compliance management system standard, used to be in place before 37001 came into being, and it usually comprised all sorts of risk fields, including anti-corruption, but also anti-money laundering and data protection and whatever there is. Compliance management, anti-corruption management system was important enough to make it an own standard, but it is closely related. So if you are already certified under 19600, ask for an upgrade or consider doing the two at a time. You will have synergies if you have other risk fields to cover. If it is only anti-bribery you want to cover, then 37001 will be enough. You definitely need, if you are not top management, I understand that there are a lot of top managers here, you will need the full support of your management and of your shareholders, because the certification is an investment, but not only in money terms, but also an effort for the whole organization. And of course, you should know the ISO standard. That is clear. Here is how the ISO standard is structured. That's the PDCA cycle. Plan, do, check, act. The contents of the standard, yeah? Those are the headlines, which I aligned with the single stages. Now it starts counting at 4 because the ISO standards 1 to 3, chapter 1 to 3 are terms and definitions, things you don't usually read on an everyday basis. Here it starts. Context of the organization, leadership, planning, support is the planning stage. Then the do phase, one single word, operation, but that is the main part, your operations. Then the check part, performance evaluation, and continuous improvement, acting upon deviations. So let's go to the single clauses. The context of the organization first is about understanding the organization and its context, meaning the stakeholders. Stakeholders does not mean shareholders. Stakeholders means clients, employees, does mean shareholders, does mean general public, may mean regulator, if any. So all those parties that influence your business. Who are the stakeholders? What is the environment? Being aware of them. 4.2 is understanding the needs and expectation of stakeholders. It is advisable. However, all these things are not requests are not formalized. So it is difficult to do a checklist of documents you need to have. It is a checklist of requirements that the auditor needs to find in the documents, whatever their name is. It's not important, but be advised to have this in writing. It will be easier then to prove. And understanding the needs of expectation of shareholders, make sure not to forget anyone, for example, a shareholder overseas or a client overseas who may be a main driver to your need to get certification. 4.3, determining the scope of the anti-bribery system. What is the system supposed to cover and what it is not? Make sure it covers incoming and outgoing bribe. Yeah, because incoming bribe is obviously harming the company, and outgoing bribe, someone may think it benefits the company, not in the long run. Not in the long run. 4.3, that's what we just had. Then the purpose of the anti-bribery management system and your bribery risk assessment. Now, also that is inevitable to have it in writing, usually in the form of a risk matrix. Risk matrices tend to be partly based on gut feeling, but you want to make sure that this gut feeling is systematically brought into the system, for example, by distinguishing between inherent and residual risk. The risk before and after you take your measures, I mean. May seem evident to you, but not to everyone, or to distinguish between impact and likelihood. How bad is it and how likely is it to happen? Then comes the leadership part. Now, leadership and commitment, the tone on the top, leading by example, resources are important, communication is important, and be sure the auditor will not only speak to the top management, but what they're communicating, but also to middle management or simple employees, and see how if it arrives, how it arrives. The resources, of course, the communication, and to ensure the accountability mechanisms, the division of responsibilities. 5.2 is the anti-bribery policy. That needs to be in writing. That is an explicit requirement. It needs to be available, needs to be communicated, updated, so, for example, published on an intranet site. And it must explicitly prohibit bribery, of course. 5.3, the organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Who is in charge of what? Who are the leaders? What are the accountabilities? Do job descriptions contain compliance responsibilities? So expect your auditors to draw a sample of employment contracts or job descriptions and see what's in there. Not necessarily every employee needs to have compliance responsibilities, but if it's only the compliance officer who has compliance responsibilities, will not be sufficient. Then the relative normative documents, I mean every normative documents in the company should be up to date. Some are less important, but those that are relative, that are relevant for anti-bribery need to be up to date. That is a requirement of the standard. And then also provisions need to be made about delegated decision making. If the top management delegates decisions to lower ranking personnel, they need to put procedures into place how to control the risks. It's put as general as that, but still it requires some effort what to do. Speaking about what to do, this is a side remark, but also important, it seems to me. If you are not sure how to resolve a certain point, you cannot expect the answer from the auditor because you put him in a conflict of interest. Yeah? He will only be able to respond very vaguely, so this is not corresponding, you need this and that is where it stops. He cannot go into consulting because then he would be in a position where he audits the result of his own consulting, so he cannot do that. If there are points of the standards which you do not understand, or which you're not sure about how they should be interpreted, then make sure you clear them up before the audit starts, or from a third party. Point 6 is the planning. All actions to address bribery risks and opportunities, how risks are identified and managed, and roles and responsibilities. Who does what in response to risks? What are the issues? What are the opportunities, meaning opportunities for correction or improvement? For example, auditor may ask questions like, do you have a policy about refunding personal fines? Do you have an answer to that? Have you thought about it? Those are issues of best practices. Yeah. 6.2, anti-bribery objectives and planning how to achieve them. The goals for the anti-bribery compliance and what is the plan? Is it consistent? Is it measurable? Is it monitored? Has it been communicated, and is it regularly updated? Are there, for example, awareness surveys among the employees? Are there KPIs in place? This is the support chapter. You need the resources, the infrastructure, deployment, the monitoring of resources. For bigger countries or bigger organizations, you may be asking yourself, do I need resources in remote regions? I mean, I've done audits in Russia. You can imagine this is a country going over 2 continents. In a bigger organization, you would need compliance officer or personnel responsible for compliance in the remote regions. Depending on what country you're from, this can be relevant. 7.2 is competence. Is training appropriately calibrated and managed in set intervals? This requires defining the higher risk positions who need special training, specifying that training, and also due diligence before hiring staff or promoting staff to sensitive positions. 7.3 is awareness and training. Awareness of the compliance policies is objective. Everyone roles and the culture of the organization. Now, this the auditor will ask in almost every interview, are you aware of the policies? What does it mean for you? That is easy to expect. Is there, if you have regular training, which you must, is there a standardized feedback coming back to the HR or whoever is organizing the training? And then do you keep lists of who attended the training and who did not and needs to do the training again? In larger organizations, this is clear. If you're small to mediums or medium-sized, it may not always be so clear. 7.2 is communication. Make sure it's internal and external. What falls under that? Especially important it is to communicate in an environment that is very corrupt. To keep up the awareness, for example, of the whistleblowing hotlines of the normative documents by sending regular reminders. Do you have a crisis communication process? Do you have a process written down what happens if your CEO gets arrested one day? And do you know how to communicate that before the press eats you? Or do you have instructions for dawn raids? Regulators coming in, knocking at your door at 9 o'clock in the morning, say, we're doing a surprise audit today, or we have to do a house search. Then this is the big part, the operation, the do part, the operation part. It's, of course, operating planning and control. Objectives and criteria defined, but but not only in the compliance unit, but throughout the organization. So all the organization needs to have objectives, criteria defined. If compliance or anti-bribery remains in the compliance office, then it did not fulfill its task. 8.2 is due diligence, meaning assessment of bribery risk in relation to specific transaction projects, activities, and so on. Financial controls, that can mean budget restraints, for example, on sponsoring, for example, on marketing, on small gifts. Those would be financial controls. Then the non-financial controls, especially about sensitive areas like procurement, operations, sales, commercial, legal activities. Litigation would be also such a field where corruption can come in. Is there enough segregation of duties? Do you have a 4 eyes principle implemented? Do key documents have to be signed off by the compliance officer? 8.5 would be the implementation of anti-bribery controls by controlled organization and business associates. So what you need to do is find out whether your controlled organization, now this could fall away in case the scope of the audit does not comprise subsidiaries. But what you definitely will have is business associates, usually clients or suppliers. There you should ask them for their anti-bribery controls, make sure you be able to prove that you asked them, and if you find out that they do not have these controls, then you need to do something with the risks. Does not mean you need to send them away, but you have to handle you have to be aware and to handle the risks. 8.6 is anti-bribery commitments. Commitments of business associates, of course, and that is obligatory. There has to be a termination clause in case of violations. If you cannot get a termination clause, usually that is an easy thing to achieve. But should there be cases where you cannot get it, still does not mean you have to send your business partner away, but you have to take the risk into account, see how you handle it. And if you find out that you cannot handle it, then you'd have to refrain from this type of activity. 8.7 is gift, hospitalities, donations, similar benefits. Do you have procedures to prevent benefits that can be perceived as bribery? Yeah, this is everyone has sort of a different feeling. Still, you need a policy that this is written down. Some companies say no gifts at all. Some give a money limit in combination with is it culturally necessary? But it needs to be written down and reasonable, of course. Then managing the inadequacy of bribery controls. If you find out that you cannot control or manage a bribery risk, then you need to withdraw from that activity. 8.9 is raising concerns. Those are the whistleblowing procedures. This is a tough one because whistleblowing hardly ever works. Still, what you need to do is provide the framework for it. Industry standard would be to have at least one hotline and or website where you can, for example, choose to report anonymously or confidentially, which is not the same, yeah? And anonymously or confidentially about wrongdoings. Make sure the employees are reminded of that. That is under the communication part, but coming in here. And yes. Yes. Good question. Should be both. Should be both. Yeah, definitely internal and external. Because if you have a client who is the only one who will tell you that your employee asked him for a bribe, then you want to know. Yes. 8.10 is investigating and dealing with bribery. Now, the approach of this, it is a management system standard. It is not a forensic approach. The auditor will not look for single cases of wrongdoings. Still, he will ask for them to see how you handle them. And it is not the best answer for you to say, we've never had such cases, because it always leaves a question. As an auditor, I much prefer to have, here are the 2-3 cases, here is how we handle it, this is what we learned from it. It's much better than to hear, no, here is everything clean, move on. Will lead to more questions. Yes, then we arrived at the performance evaluation, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. What to watch, how to watch it, how to deal with the findings, what documentation is there, do you have focuses, for example, on sponsorships. Line 2 is the review by the anti-bribery compliance function. Of course, the compliance unit is not there for itself. It should review the whole organization regularly, but not alone. There is 9.3, the internal audit, who should work in a complementary way, work together with the compliance function, and cover what the compliance function does not, or they should be working together. The auditor will definitely want to look at the audit plan, internal audit plan, look at the findings, how they were handled, how they were rectified, what lessons were learned. And then last but not least, the review by top management and governing body. It needs to be sure that there is a reporting system, regular as well as ad hoc. So if an issue comes up, that means top management at least, but also governing body members have to be accessible in a reasonable time span if something happens. And not only passively reporting, but are they also reviewing documents? Are they discussing them? Last point is the improvement section. Non-conformity and corrective action. Knowing what is not complying and acting upon it. Are there processes, mechanisms? Is there an escalation process? You have documentation. Are the whistleblowing mechanisms known and used? Here again, it is better to have cases of whistleblowing, of relevant whistleblowing, than to have an empty whistleblowing pipeline, because then this is a dead system, a dormant system. Let's call it a dormant system. And 10.2, of course, the continual improvement, including in an environment where regulatory challenges may vary or develop over time. Before I end, as I said, there are no explicit requirements of what documents are required or how they should be called. Still, I was trying to list some documents that you will definitely need in one or the other form, not meaning that this is enough, but those are definitely documents you need to have in one or the other form. Code of ethics, code of conduct, which is more precise. Then you will have to have some compliance manager or compliance function, including his or her appointment, a job description for the person. There needs to be anti-bribery training, which needs to be somehow recorded. There need to be participant lists and also lists of those who did not participate. Risk assessment and due diligence on projects and business associates, because all these questions I've asked require some sort of documentation. Does not mean paper. Does not mean paper. These audits live on what I'm trying to do as an auditor usually is meet the interviewees at the place of their work, being able to look at their screen. I don't need printouts. I want to see the process alive. It's even better than having it's often even better to having printed document, because that enables me, for example, to see if there are screensavers reminding people of bribery issues. Yeah? You will need a risk matrix in some form. You will need all the control documentation about financial, procurement, commercial, and contractual issues. Some reporting, monitoring, investigation, and review records. And of course, some documents about the corrective action and continual improvement. If there are no further questions, thank you for your attention and have a nice evening.